Welcome to the Ancestors Moment podcast. I'm your host, Angelia Santiago, and here you are at the right place if you're wanting to connect more deeply with your ancestors, claim your birthright as a chain breaker, and healing generational trauma and wounds with a spiritual, compassionate, and feminine touch. Hello, this is Future Angelia, interrupting the podcast that you're about to listen to with a quick disclaimer letting you know that there are touchy subjects such as sexual abuse, colorism, and other sensitive subjects. So if you are easily triggered by these subjects, please listen to your body before listening on. With that being said, I did sit with the medicine of Marianismo after recording this episode with Jay that I recorded a little while ago. And if you are interested and you know a little bit of my work, you do know that I tend to make oils and other witchy bruja potions that I like to use in working with woundings in correlation to our body, touching our body, not only intellectualizing these wounds. If this is something that interests you, I will link down below my Etsy shop, aka my botanica, where I will also list a Marianismo article where you can learn more about this subject if this is a subject that intrigues you. Marianismo is all about perfecting ourselves for the self sacrifice and self-silencing. And I do want to make sure that I put that disclaimer ahead of time before listening so you can better understand the subject ahead. With that being said, take lots of care and thank you for listening. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Ancestors Mama podcast. I'm your host, Angelia Santiago, as always. And today we have a special guest who I've been meaning to have on here for a very long time, Jai Correa. She is a Womb Curandera and a Doula from Caribbean Wellness. And I'm so excited to talk to her. Today's topic, we're going to be talking about how glamour magic is actually decolonial healing. So I'm so excited to get into this juicy topic. Welcome, Jay.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So for anybody who doesn't know your amazing work, how would you describe being a womb curandera?
Well, that is around healing the matriarchy, right? Working through generational trauma, healing the matriarchal line, anything that has to do really with like womb wellness, whether that's energetically or physically.
Mm-hmm. And I'm curious, like, what issues have you found in your life and like in your work coming up when it comes to that stuff?
All sorts of things, mother wound. Um, and the interesting part of that too is that when I work with someone, I usually work with their mom as well. They'll be like, my mom needs to see you too. Let's get my mom and you on the phone for like a reading. So usually get like mother daughter pairs, which is pretty cool to see. But yeah, that's kind of, especially moms, as we get triggered working with our kids, I get a lot of mothers as well, right? Who are like dealing with their mother wounds as well as like parenting their children. And so that's also an interesting dynamic.
You know what's crazy about that you said that? I don't know if you found this like on your journey, but what I've been realizing, especially lately, like the past couple months, is like for me, this internal graduation process. I mean, I'm not a mama yet. I hope to be one soon, but graduating from the archetypal energy of like the maiden to the mother, you know what I mean? Do you find that in your work as well?
Yes, definitely. And then what that looks like, right? Because a lot of people can even explain to you what that's like, but until you really like experience that for yourself, and everyone's experience is different, right? There's no one right or wrong way to go through those archetypes. And so it's a very individual, very unique journey. And that's why I try to tell folks as well, if you want to work with me on something, it's a very unique plan that we lay out together. It's not something where I'm like, I do the same thing for everyone, right? Because we all have our individual journeys and our individual traumas that we need to work through. So.
And for those who are watching, I will be uploading the video format on Spotify and YouTube. Jay is Dominican, so a lot of the magic she infuses everything is from her Caribbean background. So if you want to like talk about that as well, because I know with my work, me and you talked a lot about just having that wisdom passed down from your lineage.
Yes, and I'm wearing my De La Mia shirt, very Dominican of me today. But yeah, I learned a lot from my mother, who learned from her mother, who learned from hers, right? And it's about different things. And both my grandmother and my mother were birth workers as well, and so a lot of I learned as a kid about the womb wellness and how to care for yourself in that way, about like glamour magic and what that looks like. Not just from my mother and her grandmother and her mother, but from like different members of my family as well, and how they use glamour magic. So it is, and I work very deeply with my ancestors. So it's very, so to me, everything I do is very ancestral, right? It's a nod and a
Mhm.
respect to them as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's something that I identify with you. I mean, obviously, I call my business ancestors mama dad, but something that I wonder if you come across as well is like, you talked about that being passed on to you, and a lot of that stuff was not passed on to me because my mother's side era Pentecostal, so they were very religious. I mean, I know your family was too, but
Hmm.
I knew intuitively that my abuela was intuitive, but as far as that connection to the womb, because of, the patriarchal conditioning and religious indoctrination, that type of mentality and connection to our body was unfortunately lost. I remember stories my mother telling me, like, my abuela would be like to her, "Oh, don't kiss anyone because va a salir preñada," right? And like my mom was so scared, 12 years old, if she had a little boyfriend that she would get pregnant off of every little thing. And unfortunately, I've noticed my mom, me, and my younger sister, we all had like really bad period cramps. I've been working on them, and but my mom has had them since she was 12 years old. And I remember her telling me stories that, you know, the whole block that was trinchando, talking about that she was because she was in so much pain, and I I envy people that had that wisdom at their disposal, you know what I mean? Because unfortunately, due the due to the religious beliefs and unfortunately, that campo ignorant mentality that everything is bad, I didn't have those opportunities. I wasn't taught to really connect to my body. I was taught that anything that had to do with my pleasure, my my beauty was bad. You know what I mean? Do you come across that as well?
Yeah, and that's Marianismo, which I talk about a lot as well. And that's why I think ancestor work is important, because as we look through history and we understand, even like what happened in Puerto Rico, right, with our grandmothers in Puerto Rico that were given hysterectomies without their consent, without their knowing. They were going for something else. They didn't even tell them, right? And so that also causes a disconnect generationally with your womb, because they didn't even have one, right? They were um, they were operated without their consent, which is crazy. Um, but yeah, I think that's also very cultural. And although, like you said, we both grew up Pentecostal, there's a guilt around Christianity. It's very patriarchal in that way, that makes the burden on the women all the time, right? It's about what we're wearing. It's about what we look like. It's about how we present, or what the people are gonna say, right? Never like that with our brothers. It's always us, and we carry that burden, which is very unfair.
Yeah. And I didn't expect the subject to go here, but I feel the need, the calling to bring it up. I was having a conversation with my partner about this because we were like watching murder shit and this woman talking about, how insanity builds in the brain from children being abused, especially those abused by family members sexually. And I can't help but feel like culturally that's something, unfortunately, I noticed that's been a burden among the women in the Latin culture that is very hush hush, and if something like that happens to her, it's her fault. Que hiciste? What were you wearing? You know what I
Right.
mean? And I
Victim
know it's not
blaming.
just yeah, I know it's not just Latin culture, but it's just like deep in the roots of our culture. Like that's just it's so normal that that's the first thing that comes across people's mind. And I remember as a young kid feeling that way as well. You know what I mean? Is that Marianismo as well?
It's protecting the abuser, right? And Marianismo is about like self-sacrificing and that martyrdom that comes like, it comes from the Virgin Mary and how she self-sacrificed. And so when you think about it that way, and then also thinking about if you're Latina, then you're, somewhere along the line, your ancestors were raped, right? Most likely the indigenous ones because it was only men on that boat. So if you think about it, and our culture is matrilineal. So if you think about it that way, that's all that stuff that we're carrying in our womb from 1492, right? And so there was it's a cultural thing of like hiding or protecting the abuser and blaming the victim. What were you wearing? Why were you out so late? You know, if you were a buena niña de tu casa, that wouldn't have happened to you. And it continue, and then as we get sexualized, even as a kids, right? They don't point to the man to say, "Hey, you're sexualizing my daughter at 10, 12. You're somehow like, oh, you got to get dressed because fulano de tal is coming over. You can't wear those shorts when fulano's gonna be in the house." Instead of saying, "Fulano, you're not allowed in my home, right? Because my children don't feel comfortable around you." So there's a lot of layers to it, you know.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's what I mean about being ashamed of my body. I mean, a lot of Caribbean Latin women, which were curvy. I was born with, curves. I had always had a little booty, and I always felt ashamed of my body because it brought so much attention. That for a while I wanted to be a boy, and it's just like anything I did was wrong because my legs and my body was grabbing attention to people, and they made me feel like a slut essentially so young when a lot of times when women are sexualized, girls are sexualized at a young age, it's somebody in the family. So it's just like all of that doesn't even matter, you know?
Right, right. And it's a
And,
continual of protecting that abuser, right? Because, oh, that's the uncle or that's whoever, and so it's gonna stay in the house, right? And that's really
Mhm.
not the way to handle those things.
Yeah. And the reason why I'm bringing that up as deep and tough that subject can be, and I know makes a lot of people uncomfortable, and I apologize in advance if it was triggering. But the reason why I brought that up is because we started off this conversation planning for this podcast about how glamour magic is decolonial. And for some reason, I couldn't get it. Even as a decolonial mama on this journey for God knows how long, until you explained it to me, like I just didn't understand. I'm like, how is glamour magic decolonial? And when you explained it, I'm like, holy crap. Yeah, because I'm taking care of me for me, not for anybody else, you know? So for
Right.
those who don't understand how one can be correlated to the other, how do you explain that to people?
Well, glamour magic is about, or any magic, right? Is about intent. It's about the intent that you put in. Like I tell folks who work with me, at the end of the day, I am a healer. So even if we're working around glamour magic, you're going to be healing. There's something that you're going to be healing around you that's going to trigger, that's going to spark something. And with glamour magic, especially in Latina and Caribbean women, what I'm seeing is how our communities center European beauty as the standard of beauty, right? And so if you deviate from that standard of like maybe a wider nose or your complexion or the texture of your hair, then you're not seen as pretty as someone who's has blue eyes and blonde hair. And even if, growing up looking at Univision, look at what Univision, all the novelas, right? They were white, right?
Mm-hmm.
They looked exactly like they would at Days of Our Lives, right? There's no difference. The only difference is they spoke Spanish, right? So peeling through that, right? Going through those layers of like, hey, I may not have blonde hair, blue eyes, but that doesn't mean I'm not pretty. And instead of focusing on the things I hate about myself, I'm going to focus on the things that I like about myself and highlighting that, right? So, like, the real glow up is around accepting you and seeing that, hey, you are the beauty of your ancestors. And
Mm-hmm.
how can you highlight that for yourself, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and as soon as you say that, you know what I thought about? Like being a young girl, because I'm from Jersey, and so for a little bit of time, when I moved out of Newark, I lived in like a small town like right outside of Newark. It was a small town back then, Bloomfield. Um, and my dad made sure I went to the better school with all the white girls, and the only Hispanic people at that school was me, my brother, our downstairs neighbor, which were Puerto Ricans, and ellos eran moreno de piel, and then like two Mexican boys. That was it. And I remember I was only in third grade. And I remember that's when the shame about my body started because, like I said, I've always had like a little booty. And I remember getting made in front of for my thighs and my butt and like my knees because my knees were darker. And I've always had like, bronzy legs. Um, and I remember getting made in front of that and for my lips. And I used to want to be like, because Backstreet Boys was around then and Seventh Heaven and all that,
Britney
and like,
Spears, right?
yeah, and the style was like super skinny, light skinned, um, and blonde hair, right? And so I remember freaking hating myself, hating my big lips, hating my legs and all of that, and just feeling like there was something wrong with me. And I don't know, like as soon as you said that, like that reminded me of that. And even me and you, when we were talking about this, you shared this post about this native girl and her embracing her features and decolonizing what it means to be beautiful, right?
She said it in such a
Um,
beautiful way, too.
yeah, no, I loved it when you shared it with me. And I think that's something important to know. I feel like as a society, we've come a long way since like the freaking 90s. Obviously, we still have a long way to go, but I remember it even as well, like being told, "Oh, you're pretty for a light-skinned Puerto Rican." And I always thought, what the fuck does that mean, bro? Because my abuelo era moreno de piel. He was literally your skin color, you know? Um, and it used to bother me. And I had my grandfather be called the N-word in front of my face. So, like, stuff like that always bothered me. And even my abuela, because it's just so infiltrated in, again, our culture, tiene que mejorar la
Hmm.
raza, right? You have to make the lineage look lighter, look better. And
Yeah.
I always have been attracted to darker men. And the fact that I like that I used to get in so much trouble for that, you know?
And I grew up with a mom, a black mom, and a white dad. I mean, they're both Dominican, right? But my mom is darker skinned, and my dad is white. And the difference too, and I don't know if it also had to do with gender, right? Because now he's a white man, and the way that he could walk, even in the U.S. and the DR, it was just different than how my mom was treated. And I even remember we were running late because we're always running late. My dad used to always be on time. My mom, we would run late everywhere, even church. She didn't care. And we were running late to the airport. We were coming back from the Dominican Republic, and they held up the plane. I think I was like 8 or 10. They held up the plane because they wanted to make sure that basically I was her daughter, and they were asking me questions in English, talking about. So we're sitting there on the tarmac, and they're asking what school I go to, What's my teacher's name? What grade was I in? Is this really your mom? And even now as an adult, I look back at that and I'm like, the fact that the powerlessness that she must have felt standing there as her child gets interrogated by another adult because they didn't believe that I was her child. Like they're taking my word over an 8-year-old, right? Over a full grown adult. And so I don't know if it also made a difference that I have an American passport and she didn't, right? But it was just a lot. And those are the types of things that I witnessed a lot. And even my dad didn't speak English, never learned it. And people didn't believe it. So I tell them, like, I'm standing with him, like, hey, he doesn't, I'm translating for him, because then they'd ignore me. I'm translating for him. He doesn't speak English. And I remember once this lady just started speaking louder. And I looked at her and I was like, ma'am, he's not deaf. He has no idea what you're saying. Doesn't matter how high or how loud you speak. Like, he doesn't understand you. Like, he's not American. And that was really hard to like see those two dynamics.
That was crazy. Thank you so much for sharing that story. Yeah, and I think that's important when you talk about glamour magic and embracing our features. And what's funny is now, now we're the it thing. Latinas are the it thing so much that like freaking people like Kylie Jenner are trying to mimic our looks, which is so
Yeah.
bizarre. Like first, I don't know how you feel, but that kind of makes me angry inside. Like first, as a child, we were taught and made to feel like how we looked is less than, and now
Hmm.
they want to appropriate our culture and our looks and get BBLs and all this stuff to look like us. You know what I mean?
And it was crazy because I remember when J-Lo came out and she, the way they bullied her in the beginning because of the way she looked, right? Because of her butt mostly. And then people paying thousands now to have something that resembles her butt. And it's like, wow, you were just making fun of us for not being, a size zero, right? And now you're trying to get those same curves. So it is interesting to see it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because now like lip injections and all that stuff,
Filler.
and like people trying to do the curly hair method to look more ethnic. It's so bizarre to me. But I feel like that's just the past repeating itself because, I don't know if you know this, excuse me if I say this all incorrectly, but the gist of it, like back in the day, slavery time, the women's style was to have the little bump on their dress. Did you know that? Yeah,
Mhm.
because of like they were trying to, I guess, compete with slavery women because their men were going out, sneaking out, doing you know what with the female slaves, and to, I guess, entice the men more, like they do have those curves. That was part of the style to put the little bump in the back of the dress.
Same with the Tignon law, right? That's one of my favorite stories to tell when it comes to glamour magic. And I know I always say that word wrong because it's kind of Creolish, and my French doesn't French the way it should. But in Louisiana, in Louisiana, before the Louisiana Purchase, they they had the Creole women had to cover their heads. They made this law that said that they had to wear a head wrap because
Mm-hmm.
of they felt like the hairstyles were going to take their men away, because they couldn't do their hair in the same way. And so then they women just, which is my favorite thing. It's like, okay, you're going to try to dim my light. I'm just going to, flip it and reverse it on you. And so what the Creole woman did was, instead of just wearing a plain head wrap, they started embellishing it with, fine, I'm going to wear it, but I'm going to put feathers on it, and I'm going to put stuff on it, and I'm going to put brooches on it, and I'm still going to be cute. And they were so upset because it didn't work out as intended, right?
Yeah. What would you say to someone? I mean, I feel like my quote unquote trauma around my body image and how I look is minuscule to darker skinned women, Black women who I feel like, they're the fact of how society looks at it like as a criminal thing when a boy wears dreadlocks or braids, or a black woman wearing protective hairstyle. Like, what would you say to people like that who, like, that's still stuff that is ongoing, who have that trauma and who are made to feel like their features is troublesome? You know what I mean?
It sucks. I get angry when I see that. There was just was it Texas? There was a boy who was expelled from his school because of his braids and he wouldn't cut his hair. And that's annoying because it's like, how are you? It grows naturally from his head that way, and you're somehow penalizing him for his natural hair. And it's frustrating that we have to have laws like that, like the Crown Act, which I think Texas does have, and they still ruled against it. So I'm like, what's the Crown Act for? That's what it's for. It's so for discrimination, to prevent discrimination against the texture of your hair. And even with Latina people, we do have big issues around hair and hair texture, right? Hey, I'm
Mm-hmm.
Dominican. We know Dominicans and their blowouts and their doobies, right? In my
Mm-hmm.
family, when I wear my hair natural, it's like, oh, you didn't do your hair. And I'm like, I did.
Mm-hmm.
I wore it curly today. You know what I mean? So there's
Mm-hmm.
still a lot to like heal around that stuff.
Mm-hmm. I personally always found that stuff beautiful, and I never understood, that? Like, I remember going, because growing up, I always went to the Dominican salon, because I swear to God, I feel like they're the only ones that really know how to do my hair. I get so annoyed because, like, yeah, I have straight hair, but it's thick, and I just don't like the way other people cut it. Um, but anyhow, and of course, every time I went, I mean, qué pelo lindo and todo eso, right? Um, and but I always found their hair beautiful, and that's the opposite thing too. Like, yeah, there's history of um colonialism, white imperialism trying to duplicate African features and things like that. But I feel like it's also harmful how in society people of darker complexion, different texture hair and whatnot feel as though they have to assimilate to white culture as well and like straighten their hair porque otherwise it's pelo malo, you know what I mean? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I always found that harmful. So I don't know, just anyone who's listening, what advice would you give them who's maybe on their decolonial journey and wanting to spice up some of that with some glamour magic?
Oh. Um, I think that's difficult, right? Because there is still so much trauma around hair, and folks that are decolonizing and going through a natural hair journey. I feel like I went full circle with mine. Like I started, then but it almost felt like I had something to prove, and so
Mm,
I went back. So now I'm like, I'll do both because I can, and I'm grateful that I'm able to go curly. That was always something I loved as a kid, and I tell people this too. Like when you're looking for your magic and when you're looking for what to heal, look at your childhood because you were like your most authentic self there. And even as a kid, I used to say a lot. I love my hair because I could do both. My mom was also
mm,
a hairdresser, so it was a lot of rolos because my hair as a kid was a lot thicker, and so she would put rolos on mainly to make it easier for her to comb my hair because it was just so much of it. It was always like at my waist. And then she'd do protective style because that's what she learned from her mom, and that's what my grandmother learned from her mom. You know what I mean? Um, so it was almost about being okay with the fact that I can do both, and I enjoy that I can do both. I can wash it and put some gel in it and be on my way, right, with a wash and go, or I can put some rolos in it as well. But it's a lot to heal around that, and it's very individual. And so figuring out what is it that triggers you about it and working from there, right? And especially not letting
yeah.
someone else tell you like this is what I think of, you know what I mean? Like allowing people to go through that because it's all about the journey. So allowing you to go through that journey and understand what happened in your childhood, what have you experienced, what's the generational trauma there that you might have seen patterns of, and then working through it.
Hmm. Yeah. And as you said that, what it was reminding me of, I had this conversation with my best friend with embracing our femininity, and because she's also a curvy woman, and we were just exchanging stories of the trauma that unfortunately we had to go through dealing with that as kids and as adults. And it unfortunately calling attention that we didn't want. And one thing I realized as well, my journey kind of similar how you said like going back and forth was because I know like on TikTok and social media, there's like this infatuation with the dark feminine. And I realized that just like the light feminine has wounds, has shadow sides, so does the dark feminine. And for me, the reason why I bring that up is because I started to use my body, the pain point around my body, like something out of anger to flaunt, like como quien dice, you know what I mean? It was taking that pain and just flipping it in a way that wasn't healthy and kind of perpetuated that self harm, you know? And so as soon as you said that, it made me think of that. And as I'm saying all this, I know we're going into like really deep topics, and I honestly, we just had the initial conversation and we're like, okay, we'll just have an organic conversation about it on the podcast. I did not intend on talking about this at all. So I will apologize 1,000 times if this is triggering anyone, but how Jay said, like if it's triggering you, it's for a reason. You know what I mean? Because I will be completely honest, everything you're talking about is triggering me.
No.
But like that's why I'm talking about it. You know what I mean? Because if I feel like I'm gonna empower myself in a way by saying I feel like one of my biggest strengths and my power is being vulnerable. And if I can be vulnerable about those things, I hope it at least inspires people to give themselves the same space and safety to do that, as difficult as it may be. You know what I mean? And
Right.
you know, it's and I've been highlighting women of color because I am very aware of my privilege as being a lighter skinned Latina, and it's always grinded my gears of how women of color, especially, those who have darker features and coarser hair are treated, and it's always just bothered me. And being lighter skinned, even though yo no soy blanca, like I tan really easily and all that stuff. um it's always bothered me how comfortable people have felt because of my lighter complexion saying certain things to me. You know what I mean? And I feel like
Hmm.
I feel like it's my duty to use my privilege. I cannot talk today. Using my privilege as a platform to talk about these things and having these difficult conversations, because all of us women can help each other heal in this way, whether or not you're lighter skin or darker skin. That's not the point of us fighting one another. We all have the trauma, but I feel like if we at least have this conversation and talk about it and being open and saying what it is, we can heal collectively as a community. You know what I mean?
Right. And I think the patriarchy in general creates this sort of like competitive space, right, for women. Even looking at hip hop, right? There could only be one, and I'm like, why? There's 50 plus men, but you want to pit the girls against each other. It's always like I got to be that top girl, and there's always like two fighting, right? Um, and I feel like they do that on purpose because imagine if we do collaborate in the way that we've been, right? The way that we used to pre-colonially, it was a matriarchal lineage. If someone married or chose to be with, so say like someone from a Puerto Rican tribe decided to marry someone from a Dominican tribe, he wouldn't go to Puerto Rico, he would go to Dominican Republic, right? It follows matriarchally, or even like creating when someone becomes a cacique, it comes from the matriarchal line, right, back then. And so
Mm-hmm.
women were held in a higher regard with our intuitiveness, with the ways that we connected with nature. And the patriarchy and colonialism kind of took that and said, well, we could disband it if we made it competitive because everything for the patriarchy is competitive, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, decolon, now I can't talk either today, decolonizing is about that too, right? It's about reframing our perspectives around working with women and healing not just our mother wounds, but our sister wounds that we may have had
Mm,
growing up, so that we can collaborate and work in community, right?
yeah. No, I feel that definitely. Um, what would you say to someone? I know I've been asking you so many questions, but I really just
That's
want to
okay.
pick your brain. I really want to prick your brain as long as I have you here, and hopefully it helps other people. What would you say to someone, a woman, who has like jealousy, sister wounds, and that competitive energy, the need to feel competitive, or she compares herself when it comes to decolonial healing and glamour magic?
Man, I mean, it really is a change of perspective. It's really looking at nature as well. If even if you look at the animals, the plants, they each have a role, right? Nobody's competing with the sun and the moon. They each have a role. The sun doesn't come out and it's like, oh my God, is somebody going to be upset that I'm shining? The sun just does its thing, right, naturally. Same with the moon. The moon comes up and it's like, oh my God, is someone going to say something about me shining so bright today? No, it just does its thing. And so a lot of our sister wounds is because someone tried to dim our light, and so now we don't know how to be authentic or how to shine because we're afraid of, I don't know, of like that competition piece. But it's about being in the right circles, about allowing yourself to be authentic, because when you are, you attract the people that want to be around you, right? Because you're authentically you. Instead of wearing a mask 24/7 and then you're exhausted because you're constantly having to mask.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And as you said that, I was also thinking of how, it is decolonial healing, us bringing back the attention to us, because how you talk about, I always butcher this. I can't say this word. There are certain words I just can't say. Marianismo. Um,
Yeah,
that the attention has to be on other people, servicing other people, and bringing
it's the
that attention back.
value,
Mm,
right? It's about you're not valuable unless you're out of service.
mm-hmm.
And that's
Girl,
hard. That's a hard habit to break.
who are you talking to? That's why I'm asking these questions. Like, that is something I've been definitely working with. I've been doing a lot of inner child healing and mothering her. Um, and that's why I started off this conversation, that I definitely feel like the last couple months I've been graduating into this motherly archetype energy and mothering and nurturing myself. Whereas before I was trying to do things for show to prove myself. You know what I mean? And I feel like
Hmm.
all of us who've been through some form of trauma, it gets reversed and perverse in a way that we kind of end up doing the same damage and harm to ourselves, you know? And I definitely, that's something that, I don't know if you come across this in your work, but like, I have the deep sister wound of like women being jealous of me or wanting to compete with me for no reason, and I don't even do anything, and apparently anything I do just triggers the shit out of someone. And I'm just like, I wasn't even being loud. And so it's been this trajectory feeling of needing to minimize myself in order to survive. You know what I mean? And it's been really, really hard. So I'm curious, what would you say to all of that?
Um, that's why I say glamour magic is such a great like companion to healing work, because as we heal those sister wounds and as we work through those wounds, we are able to utilize glamour magic to help with that, right? To give that extra bump, like of confidence, of like that solar plexus work, that womb work that sometimes we're missing, or that even that throat, right? Because we are afraid of expressing ourselves because of however we were treated in the past. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and some of us were bullied by our own moms. You know what I mean? And that's hard too, because it's like if my own mom bullied me, who can I trust? And that's where the sisterhood wound comes in too, because it's like my own mother mistreated me. So I'm just not, I don't trust anyone else. So really working through those things or whatever those triggers are for you so that you can be authentically you and then create a circle or community of women that love you for being authentically you. That's where we also heal in sisterhood, we heal in community. And so that's
Yeah.
an important piece of it too. So we can get to a certain point by ourselves and then we need kind of that community, that culture to help us through the rest of it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, thank you for that. Yeah. And for those who are listening and or watching, out of curiosity, like, because I've been doing my own stuff at my altar and whatnot, and I've been saying I love you and hugging myself and looking at my in the mirror and not trying not to judge myself as I do it. Like, would you say, I mean, a huge component of my healing is bringing back the attention to my body and connecting with my body. And I know, I mean, you worked on this as much as my Capricorn brain got in the way. Um, like, would you say that's the starting point in doing all of that? Just the simplicity of just like bringing the intention and loving on our body when it comes to decolonial glamour magic?
Yeah, you mentioned an altar, but we are also the altar, right? Talking about like ancestral and inheriting that ancestral beauty. I honor myself as an altar. That's ancestral work as well, right? And so, and I'm not saying that we got to be done up every single day. I'm the biggest glamour witch, and I most of the time I look like a bum. But when I get dressed with intention, right? Because really, that's what it is
Mm,
about. It's about the intention of giving myself time to get ready for the day based on whatever I want to look like, whether I wanted to wear a t-shirt like today or whether I'm going out to dinner and I want to wear something nice. Um, but really it's treating ourselves as the altar. And so that's, to me, that's glamour magic. That's the colonial within glamour magic to say, how am I how am I adorning myself, right? There's always the ancestors always talk about adornment, un adorno in that way. And so how am I doing that for myself? How am I being intentional with what I put on, with how I treat myself, with how I move my body, because I'm an altar. I am a living altar. And so how am I honoring that for today, for
mm,
tomorrow? And every day could be different, right? But how am I honoring
mm-hmm,
that every day?
mm, mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Yeah,
Yeah,
I needed that reminder because like I know it, but you forget it sometimes. You know what I mean?
right.
And I think that's a definitely big tool to use when it comes to that. So thank you so much for everything we talked about. I know it was a lot, but again, I felt like it was a conversation that was necessary, if whether or not have you're on the spectrum of using those shadows in a rebellious way that's inflicting more harm or minimizing yourself. I hope this was helpful in some way. And if you want to connect with Jay, I will leave down all her socials down below so you can get connected with her in decolonial glamour magic healing and womb healing. And she even does doula work. She's amazing for all of that. I will link that all below. But for those listening, how can they connect with you, Jay?
You can either email me at j@caribe-wellness.com. I'm on Instagram at the matriarch_healer. So feel free to reach out. And also, if this episode was triggering for you in any way, journal about it. You know, ask yourself what happened and why, and how did your body respond so that you can learn to reconnect with your body in that way. Was it like in your heart? Was it in your solar plexus? And just write about it, you know.
Definitely. I definitely second that motion. So thank you all for listening. I will catch you all on the flip side and take lots of good care of yourself. Thank you so much for listening to the Ancestors Mama podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please give it a 5-star review. This helps expand our reach to other like-minded folk like yourself. If you would like to connect with me more, you can do so with my social media links down below. And if you would like a deep ancestral healing reading, you can also do so down below in the links provided. I hope to see you here soon, and as always, take much needed care of yourself.